Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlinson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we start, I would like to draw your attention to my weekly email newsletter, Friday Focus. Each Friday, I focus on one topic with one action arising. The link to sign up is in the show notes, or head over to amyrowlinson.com and sign up right now. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Nicola Peel. Nicola, welcome.
Hello, Amy.
Where are you joining us from today?
I am in the South Downs National Park by the River Arun in West Sussex in England.
Oh my goodness. Are you actually outside or are you indoors?
Well, kind of a bit of both. I've got a big window that I'm looking out. So I'm looking out over the land.
Oh, it sounds gorgeous. Thank you for sharing. So what is it you're focusing on at the moment other than the beautiful landscape?
I'm spinning a lot of plates at the moment, but my main focus is shifting the conversation away from planting trees. I'm an environmentalist speaking against planting trees, and instead to focusing on let's saving what we already have. I've spent over 20 years working in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And over those 20 years, I've seen so much primary rainforest be cut down. But it's so easy to get money to plant trees, whilst we lose so much of this ancient intact forest. So that's really one of my drivers, which gets me up in the morning, is my work with the charity Rainforest Saver and coordinating with scientists and different people around the world who also want to work on conservation.
For 20 years, why did you leave?
Why did I leave? Well, I'd already left. I left England when I was 20 with that idea of I'm going to go traveling and work around the world for a year. And that 1 year turned into 3 years before I returned to the UK. And then I found myself living in Australia, where I had the brilliant opportunity to meet the deep ecologist, John Seed. And it was through John and his organization that first sent me down to the Ecuadorian Amazon. And that's where I ended up. And that's where I stayed for since 2000. I've been working in the Ecuadorian Amazon.
Amazing. And just even that name, John Seed, I mean, that's a brilliant case of nominative determinism where your surname literally helps you to establish your career. What about you? What was your career instigation?
I think when you see things with your own eyes and it becomes real to you, as I was traveling, I started to see these kind of environmental destructive practices around the world. And I've never been somebody that can kind of turn away from something. If there's an injustice or there could be something done to help, I would want to step forward and say, well, hey, what can we do about this? And I was young and naive and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I still had this way of thinking of I want to solve problems. And years later, I now introduce myself as a solutionist. That's what I do. I don't focus on the problems in the world, but on the solutions and what we can be doing. So in all areas of my work, whether it's protecting rainforests or if it's education or teaching about the wisdom of nature or founding alliances, there's many, many areas where we need a paradigm shift. We need to change the way we currently look at the world and our operating manual. So that's really what kind of drives me.
And you mentioned you were young and naive and you wanted to solve the problems. What was the shift to not being naive?
I think it's just the time and the doing, rather than just speaking about. A lot of people are really good at the talking about we need to do this and we need to do that. But when you physically decide that, okay, let's see what we can do. I mean, I went to the Amazon and I come across these huge pools. There's 1,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools full of oil left behind by Chevron Texaco. This is a massive problem. It's a big secret. Nobody knows about it. And, who was I, one person, to do anything about this massive legacy left behind in the Amazon? And I heard that fungi could clean up oil spills through something called mycoremediation. So when I learned this, I organized a team of scientists to come down to the Amazon with me, and I would show them the oil spills, and we would start doing some trials to see if we could work with mycoremediation in the Amazon. So it was okay, well, who am I to do this? Well, what have I got to lose? Let's just start the conversation. Let's bring people down to witness it. And so I think it was just the coming up with an idea, the what ifs, that, well, let's just give it a go. And so all of my projects have really been around identifying a problem and then looking at, what the solution could be. So that's really and although it's such a huge project, cleaning up the oil, what was apparent that was the immediate need was for people to be able to drink clean water. And they live in the rainforest, but they'd never collected the rainwater because culturally they just collected it from the streams and the rivers. And that was why they were so sick. In fact, sadly, it's the highest childhood leukemia in the world is the children in the Amazon. And that is because of this toxic water that they drink and they swim in. So I was the first person to actually build rainwater systems in the Ecuadorian Amazon to help those people that were most in need for clean water. And again, it was just start really simple. Let's just get a bucket and a bit of roofing tin and build a really simple catchment. And then over the years, I built different filters and different systems and ended up myself and one other woman, an Ecuadorian woman, building a few hundred families' rainwater systems. So yeah, it's trial and error as well.
It sounds like nothing stops you from wanting to do something that's going to make a difference. Has there been cases where you've been stopped or stopped yourself even?
No.
Yeah, I love that. So what is it that keeps you focused in this area of saving this corner of the world particularly, but also how it links with the rest of the world?
Well, what drives me is my absolute love of the earth, this deep awe and reverence that I have for this planet. I really see the beauty. And I think many people don't see the beauty. They might passingly look at a beautiful rose and say, oh, that's pretty. But when you start deeply going in to the earth's processes and systems and then get out a little magnifying lens and start looking at things, you start to see this wonder. And because I've been lucky to have spent time in some of the most biodiverse places on the planet, like the cloud forests, which are in fact more biodiverse than the Amazon itself, and being surrounded by all these incredible insects and birds and fungi, and I mean, no 2 days are ever the same, and really living amongst that life, that just really deepens my sense of wanting to do whatever I can to help protect it.
And being in this environment, did you ever feel that you didn't belong in this particular environment? Did you ever see yourself as a stranger in this place?
Well, obviously, when I'm with Indigenous cultures and I'm the only white person, I stand out a bit like a sore thumb. But I also have the knowing that I am a part of nature. So many humans don't feel that they're part of nature. They think that nature is somewhere where we go on holiday, or it's the national parks, or it's, the beach, or they don't think that we are nature. It's like nature is the other. But we have to really remind ourselves that humans are a part of nature. We're just another species on this planet. We might not be as important as the earthworm to the ecosystem, but we are just another species. So I think when we put ourselves back in that remembering that we're a part of nature, then we can feel more that we belong, even though it may not be our indigenous land that we're on.
What's led, do you think, Nicola, to this separation?
There's many reasons for our separation. There's religion, there's culture, there's technology, there's this feeling of the other, tribalism. There's all sorts of ways which separate us from the remembering. And now, especially in the modern world, which, really we are part of the minority on this planet. And for us that spend most of our times inside, most of the day is inside a house or an office, or we're not outside, we're not in the elements. And it's like we look through glass at nature. We look outside, like nature is outside, rather than putting ourselves clearly back into it.
And you speak about this remembering as though it's a passed down knowledge that has at some point been forgotten. Do you think that's the case?
I think in our culture, yes. In many cultures around the world, especially the indigenous cultures, it has never been broken. They are deeply connected to the land that they live. And we can't imagine that, because how many people do you know who live on the same piece of land that their great, 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 great grandparents were born on and were buried on? When you come from a piece of land which has that lineage, of course you feel so connected that you will die for that land, because that land has always sustained you and all your family. But because in the Western world, we move here, we move there, we don't become connected to any one piece of land. There's an interesting study once that showed that if as a child you played somewhere out in nature, in some woods or somewhere, as an adult, if that place is threatened, you're more likely to want to try and save it because you had some connection as a child with that land. If you don't have that connection with the land, then you don't really care so much. That your life becomes very insular. So part of what my mission is to help people fall back in love with the land. Because it's only when you love something that you want to protect it.
There is a deep connection that I'm feeling here with you, with the environment. And there's, as we've talked about, that there isn't necessarily a separation of where that is. It's because it's all, you recognize that it's part of who you are and your very being. With this mission of helping people to fall back in love with the land, with the environment, with what's going on around them, instead of the planting of new and protecting the old. What do you see as being the pivotal moment for people to really get the need for connection to the land?
By spending more time outside. People say, oh, it's raining, it's windy, I don't want to go outside. It's not very nice weather. Well, sometimes it's so good for us to push ourselves to the edges. That's where there's so much fertility. When we just say, you know what, it's pouring down with rain and I'm just going to go for a walk in it. And I'm just really going to immerse myself into the elements. I think, wild swimmers would say the same, people that are into swimming in freezing water. How different do you feel when you come out of that experience, that direct experience with nature? So that surely is where it starts. And a really great practice is to find a sit spot. somewhere near where you live, that if you're in a town or a city, in a park, or if you can get out to the countryside, and you regularly go to the same place. And that then starts to connect you to the seasons, to the land, to the creatures that live there. And when you sit in the same place over time, you start to connect more and see the changes that are happening. And the real challenge, which is very hard for modern people, they say you need to sit for a minimum of 20 minutes without moving, just sit in observation. And that is when nature, the baseline will change. Nature will accept your presence there. Because normal humans are just very busy and noisy, and they're always on their phone, they're chatting, they're walking through nature. They're not just sitting and observing. That shift can really help us to become more observant to the world in which we live.
And you talk about normal humans. Are you not a normal human?
Well, normal humans, modern humans, this can all kind of be overlapped, can't it? I think when I think of the modern human, or the normal human in our world here, it would be the majority that are most of the time looking down onto their phones. If you go on a train and have a look at the modern human, how many are just looking out of the window? And how many are absorbed into technology and not looking at the world outside?
And you spoke just then about our world here. How many worlds are there, if this is just one representation for us?
Possibly infinite. How many worlds are there? Gosh, I think you need a quantum physicist to answer that one. How I see it are those that are the indigenous people of the land, who have always lived on a certain piece of land. So, and they're continuing with their traditions. They are absolutely able to survive without a supermarket, without a fashion store, without a bit of tech. They can just survive. Most modern humans couldn't. If the supermarkets were closed and the shops were closed and no water came out of your tap, would you know how to survive? How resilient is the community that you live? And that's what differs. Peoples who have this kind of unbroken lineage have a very strong connection to place and to community, to those people that they live, around, we're in the same place. And when we change that to this kind of modern Western way of living, where a lot of people don't know their neighbors, they don't know people around where they live. So you lose that sense of resilience and connection to place.
Yeah, I'm hearing you, and I'm hearing this huge dependency on survival of others to show you, do things for you. As you said, what would happen if your water supply was cut out? How long would you survive if you didn't have access to that? And we're seeing that happen all over the world where there are wars, and people are really struggling to survive. This disconnection and inability to understand how the world is, and nature, in terms of what the resources are, how we can use those. You mentioned about the indigenous people who have this unbroken lineage. Do you think that purpose exists in their world in the same way that we might consider purpose?
I think it would be very different. They don't think of themselves as individuals. They think of themselves as as a community. So they work for the greater good. So their purpose is of ensuring that their community thrives. And they do something called a minga, which is very typical within Indigenous communities. And that is a community work day. And it every so often, not every month, but quite regularly, a mingle will be called and everybody, young and old, turns up. And one month it might be, we need to do a big harvest or fix a roof or fix a bridge or clear the football field. So the community comes together, works together, and then there's like a celebration and everybody eats together, the kids play together, all age groups are together. And that purpose to ensure that the work gets done, whatever is needed, that's what drives them, to ensure the best for the whole community, rather than looking at this, what's best for me. I think that's part of the breakdown in our modern human uncivilization, that we are much more focused on the I, what's in it for me, what's my personal purpose. And how can we expand that out to say, well, okay, what about my community where I live, the land in which I live? How can we start to rethread the tapestry that is so broken in our modern way of living?
I'm with you. And my model of purpose is founded on collaborative pieces. It's not possible, I believe, in living with a purpose that you share for yourself. It doesn't make any sense for me. And that community work day, when you were talking about the coming together of the community to do something, instantly I was transported to the film Witness with Harrison Ford, where the Amish people raise a barn in a day and then they celebrate at the end. And I that image is so strong and the music is so evocative of what happens in that day. It's a beautiful piece there to illustrate collective purpose, as you were sharing just then. It was a real poignant memory for me.
I think there's something really to be said in how do we bring this into our modern way of living? How can we actually be of benefit to the place that we live? And that's a big part what drives me on. I want to think, well, if I die tomorrow, I've done my best for this land. And part of people feel like, oh yeah, we're tree planting. Absolutely. Of course, planting any kind of native wildflowers and trees which can support habitat is important. But there's so many parts of it that the equation doesn't add up. Often trees are planted in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the wrong species. So it's not just this big rush of, don't worry, everybody, tree planting will get us out of this. It's an easy fix for a business to say, we'll carry on with business as normal, but we're going to plant some trees. And this can narrow us down into this way of thinking where we become very tunnel visioned. So for me, this paradigm shift that is needed for us to start to see our connection with the land and our place in it, and seeing that personal responsibility of every action we as an individual take, it has a ripple. So looking at that, whether we're an individual or we're a business, and asking, well, what is my impact on the earth right now? And how could I make that positive? How could I make my life and my business to help with the future to move away from this world that we're in right now into a more kind of flourishing way of being? Because I think we all agree, from whatever land that you come from, what do you want? You want health and happiness for your family. And we can really only have health and happiness if we live in a healthy land. So they are totally together, but it takes all of us, it takes everybody to step up and just do a little bit more.
You mentioned right at the beginning, Nicola, about the paradigm shift. You just mentioned it again about how we need to change how we look at the world. And you mentioned finding a sit spot. That's one element, but I don't feel like that's the viewpoint you were talking about of how we change our are looking at the world as a whole. What is it for you?
I think it's whole systemic change. Everything has to change, from our political system that is dysfunctional, our economic system, our legal system, as well as socially and individually. So all of these systems are currently broken. And how do we look at each of those strands and find ways which we can really help and we can learn from? And there are so many great people out there doing great work. It's not like we're starting from the beginning. We know what we need to do. We know we need to move into a more circular economy, how we can learn from the natural world, that there's no such thing as waste. This is a human creation. How do we deal with that? How do we deal better with governance? That people have a say, that they feel that they're heard. How do we move past the economic system right now, which is very good at funding destructive practices, but very hard to get money for regenerative agriculture or for doing what's right for the future of the land? So moving that investment into impact investment, so we know that we can actually drive positive change through money. So there are so many areas which are part of the shift that is needed right now.
You mentioned about getting people to feel as though they're heard. Who needs to hear this message specifically?
I think it's intergenerational. The young people don't feel heard. Many people don't feel heard. We're represented by MPs that may not actually represent us personally. And we feel that we have no say. Many people that I speak to, and I say to them, have you ever spoken to your MP? No. What's the point? So to say, what's the point? Not feeling that you have any personal say in the governance of the land where you live needs to change. Young people need to have a voice. So why are we not reducing our voting age? 16-year-olds right now, you speak to any 16-year-old and say that they are not wise enough to be able to make a decision. Where we have a system where we've got people voting, to the end of their days, when they can vote for something they will never see the repercussions for in the future. So when we start kind of expanding our timeline, instead of just thinking of the next 4 years, there's in North America, the 5 Nations people, they would base on the 7th generation to come. So every question that was held by their council was, how will this affect the 7th generation? Imagine if we were to think like that. Currently, government only wants to think about the next 4 years maximum. So these ideas of future generations having some say in their future is imperative, that we change from this old, outdated way of thinking to being a little bit more expansive and looking forward a bit more to the world that we want to see. I think it's really imperative that we all get a new vision of the future. Because right now we have a lot of apocalyptic or dystopian views of the future. But I can't think of any positive films, or there's not a lot going on that's showing us what the future could look like. And so for each and every one of us to start visioning the world that you want to see. What is the world that you want for your children? What is the world that you would love to see happening? And as more of us vision the world that we wish to live in, then we work backwards from there and say, well, hey, how do we get from where we are now to the world that we want to see? And that is a really big part of moving and shifting away from this current dysfunctional system that we find ourselves.
And it's really interesting. We're living longer than we have before, ever. And in terms of that longevity, you would think that people would be more involved in what the future looks like. And as you said, a lot of people can defer the responsibility, and right at the beginning you were saying, well, somebody else can focus on that, or, and you've taken responsibility for the injustices, for what you see as needing a solution to be provided for it. As a solutionist, what's the vision for you that will hold you accountable for what's to come?
What's my vision of the future is obviously a lot greener than it is currently now. And if we start with the cities, why would the cities of the future be green? Well, obviously people want better air quality and improved biodiversity, better for your mental health to be surrounded by greenery. But the real practicalities too. If you have green buildings, they cool themselves in summer and they are more insulated in the winter. So it makes sense on so many levels to be starting to green our cities. And there are already some brilliant examples of these, vertical growing systems where walls are totally covered in plants. And there's a real problem in the summer. Some cities are so hot. We all want to have a better standard of living. And so putting into place that which is good for the environment and good for the mental health of people kind of works together. So when we start to have this futuristic way of looking, and I work a lot and I speak about biomimicry and how we can learn from the wisdom of the natural world. If we start to really clearly look at nature's forms and processes, we have so much to learn to improve our efficiency. So it's a really exciting model of the future, going down the line of learning from nature. So I'd really encourage people to look into biomimicry to start to see how we can build a different future.
Do you think at some point in history that happened more so than it does now?
Well, once upon a time, obviously, we lived with only that which we built. If we lived on clay, we built from clay. In the Amazon, you built out of wood. You weren't able to bring anything in. So there was no shipping anything in or out. So everything that you used came from a very close diameter. And now we bring everything in from far away. So the question is also, how can we learn from the past, but also with the wonders of electron microscopes that we can now really see like we never could in the past? We can use technology to see really detailed structures in nature. So we can learn in the future to build and use a lot less resources and make buildings a lot stronger and lasting a lot longer. So that's how I feel like we need to say, learn from the past and learn from the future, and look at this incredible wisdom that's all around us in the natural world. We've just not been asking the right questions.
And the right questions being?
How can we move past the idea of sustainability? How can we thrive? How can we flourish on this planet? How can we be more energy efficient? How can we eliminate waste? How can we be happy? How can we live in community? There are so many questions to how the humans and the rest of the planet can live in harmony together. And how do we do that?
And I'm thinking about when you just mentioned sustainability, the UN sustainability development goals that were set, which had a target of 2030, and we're ever so close to that time period that they'd set. the focus was on different elements and they broke them down. And of course, there's the partnership for all of the goals together. Is there a better way to have a more inclusive goal than having them all separated? I mean, I'm not knocking the fact that there's been a huge amount of work in all of the 17 areas, which is fantastic. But what I'm hearing here is with the new question of moving past sustainability, what does it mean?
Yeah, I take my hat off to the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a good step in the right direction. I've also been working with One Planet, who are coming from the founders of the Sustainable Development Goals, but have simplified it down to 10 areas that we can all agree upon. And this is using technology, using mapping to look at those areas which are really important. I think we all agree that water and waste and energy and transportation and health and well-being, these areas are important to everybody. So using One Planet, we can actually start to map our locality and our councils and our businesses to see how we're working in these areas. So I think having that vision and that ability, but also the technology, helps us to navigate the world that we want.
There's been so many areas that I'd love to have explored further, Nicola, today. And I really thank you for bringing so many of these different pieces of the jigsaw together. And, the One Planet message is amazing in terms of what that forms for me, that we are all part of a planet. We all have a collective responsibility for it. And that whole, somebody ought to do something about ... fill in the blank. Well, that falls on you too. It's not for someone else to pick up the lead there. It could be you. And you demonstrated right from the outset of this conversation that you haven't shirked your responsibility. When you've seen something, you've taken the action and moved from that talking to doing. And it's been really, really admirable to hear this approach and to see how almost easy in some elements it has been for you to just be and do like that. So I hope that you've inspired others to take action from that element particularly. How would people get in contact with you, Nicola?
So through my website, my name, nicolapeel.com. I also interview interesting solutions-based people. So you can find me through Patreon, Solutionist, and I send out a monthly either video interview or a blog about what I'm currently working on. So they're the best ways, and I'll leave you all with my social media handles as well.
Fantastic. Well, they're all in the show notes. So no excuses to not get in touch with Nicola. There has been a strong message today, and I really feel that the purpose piece has been the undercurrent throughout the conversation. It really has. And that collective action has been certainly the focus of what we can do and what we need to do, and how it starts from today. If it hadn't already been a seed that you'd planted, then it really has started to flourish for those where it has been. Thank you. It really has been a pleasure hearing your focus on why. Have you got some final words for the audience, please, Nicola?
Well, there's a couple of sayings I would like to leave. And one is the great singer Joan Baez. And she says, action is the antidote to despair. So for those people that are feeling in despair about the state of the world, then taking action in whatever way you can and getting together with local groups really, really helps. And there's another analogy that we are on this like spaceship. If we think of spaceship Earth, and we're flying through the universe, and on our spaceship, all the lights are flashing: waste, water, CO2, oxygen. The red lights are flashing, but we're not doing anything about it. So my question to everybody is, who are you? And what can you do on this spaceship of ours?
How has this conversation had an impact on you? What value have you received from tuning in? What are your reflections with actions? Please take a moment to leave me an Apple Podcast or Spotify review sharing how Focus on Why has made a difference to you today. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. To keep it going, simply connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, or join the Focus on Why Facebook group. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.